What if the light you thought was lost had been working behind the scenes all along, waiting for the perfect moment to break through your darkest clouds? Let me tell you a story that will forever change the way you see hope. The morning air carried a quiet heaviness, the kind that presses on your chest and makes you wonder if the day ahead will hold joy or trouble. The Sea of Galilee, usually a glistening expanse of blue, now lay dull and lifeless under a gray sky. The clouds stretched endlessly, their thick, unbroken mass muting the sunlight and casting a somber tone over the hills. It wasn't raining, but the air was damp and cool, hinting at the storms that had passed and those that might still come. The disciples followed Jesus up the familiar path to the hill where they often gathered. The climb was slow, their steps subdued as they exchanged quiet words. Peter, his brow furrowed, kicked a loose stone along the path. "It feels like the whole world is holding its breath," he muttered, glancing at the sky. "No light, no warmth. It's as if the sun itself has turned away from us." John, walking beside him, gave a thoughtful smile. "Or perhaps the Lord has chosen this kind of day for a reason. You know, he always has something to teach us." When they reached the top of the hill, they spread out on the damp grass, forming a loose circle around Jesus. The usual excitement and chatter were absent, replaced by a contemplative silence. Jesus stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His robe shifted gently in the cool breeze, and his face, though serene, held an intensity that drew their attention. "The clouds today are heavy," Jesus said, his voice calm yet filled with purpose. "But tell me, do you think the sun has stopped shining?" The disciples exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of how to respond. It was Andrew who finally broke the silence. We can't see it, Lord. But that doesn't mean it's gone, does it?" Jesus smiled gently, nodding. "Exactly, Andrew. The sun has not stopped shining. It is merely hidden. Let me tell you a story, one that may help you understand the deeper truth behind these clouds." The disciples leaned in closer, their curiosity piqued. They knew from experience that when Jesus spoke, his words carried lessons that could transform their understanding of life itself. In a distant village nestled among green hills, there lived a woman named Miriam. Her home was simple, its whitewashed walls softened by climbing vines that bore small, fragrant blossoms. But what truly set Miriam apart was her garden. It was a breathtaking patch of earth, bursting with color and life. Roses in every shade of red and pink stood alongside bright yellow daisies, while lavender swayed gently in the breeze, releasing a calming fragrance. Miriam's garden wasn't just admired, it was cherished by the villagers, who often came to her for advice on how to tend their own plants. Miriam herself was a woman of quiet strength. She had lost her husband many years ago, and though her heart still ached with the memory of him, she had found solace in her garden. Every flower she planted felt like a prayer, every weed she pulled a small act of hope. Her hands, calloused from years of care, seemed to carry a magic touch that brought life to the soil. When people asked her the secret to her garden's beauty, she would smile softly and say, "The Lord has blessed me with the sun, the rain, and the strength to nurture what he gives." But one year a storm arrived and refused to leave. The clouds came first, thick and unrelenting, followed by days of torrential rain. The once bright mornings turned into an endless stretch of gray. Miriam's garden, her sanctuary, began to suffer. The roses, once vibrant, drooped under the weight of the rain. The daisies lost their sunny glow, and even the hardy lavender began to fade. Miriam worked tirelessly, trying to protect her plants. She covered them with tarps, adjusted the soil to drain the excess water, and whispered prayers as she worked. But the rain seemed endless, and her efforts felt futile. Her once thriving garden was now a shadow of its former self, and Miriam's heart ached with the loss. One evening, as the rain paused for the first time in days, Miriam knelt in her garden, her hands buried in the muddy soil. Her hair clung to her face, damp from the lingering mist, and her tears mixed with the dirt as she cried out, "Why, Lord? Why have you hidden the sun from me? Why have you let the beauty you gave me fade away?" Her voice trembled with despair, and she felt as though her cries were swallowed by the gray sky above. But then, out of the silence, a gentle voice called to her. "The sun has not gone, child." Startled, Miriam turned to see an old man standing at the edge of her garden. He leaned on a wooden staff, his face lined with age but softened by a kind smile. His robes were simple, his presence unassuming, yet there was something about him that felt timeless, almost otherworldly. "What do you mean?" Miriam asked, her voice shaking. "The sun is gone. My garden is dying, and I can do nothing to save it." The old man stepped closer, his movements slow but deliberate. He gestured toward the clouds above. "The sun has not abandoned you. It is hidden, yes, but it shines still. Even now it nourishes the earth through the rain. And when the time is right, the clouds will part and you will see its work." Miriam stared at him, her heart torn between doubt and the faintest glimmer of hope. "How can I believe in something I cannot see?" she whispered. "Faith," the old man said, his voice steady and kind, "is believing in what your eyes cannot yet behold. Trust in the sun's return and you will see." The old man's words stayed with Miriam, echoing in her heart even as the clouds lingered. Though she didn't fully understand his wisdom, she decided to act on it. Each morning she rose early and went to her garden. The flowers were still wilted, their colors dulled, but Miriam watered the soil, removed the dead leaves and whispered prayers of gratitude for the life that once was and the life she hoped would return. Her neighbors, passing by, often stopped to watch her. They saw the state of her garden and shook their heads. "Why does she bother?" they whispered among themselves. "The garden is dead." But Miriam paid no mind to their words. She worked with quiet determination, her hands moving with the same care and love they always had. Each act of tending her garden became an act of faith, a declaration that she believed in the sun's return, even if she couldn't yet see it. And though doubt sometimes crept into her heart, she clung to the old man's words like a lifeline, trusting that they held a truth she could not yet comprehend. One morning, Miriam awoke to a strange warmth on her face. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but as her eyes fluttered open, she saw her room bathed in golden light. She jumped out of bed and rushed to the window, her breath catching in her throat. The clouds, which had seemed eternal, were breaking apart. Rays of sunlight poured over the hills, spilling into the village like a flood of warmth and life. Heart-pounding, Miriam ran to her garden. What she saw left her speechless. The plants that had seemed dead were stirring with new life. Tiny buds peeked out from the stems, their colors richer than ever. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze, releasing its sweet fragrance into the air. The rain, though harsh, had nourished the soil, and now the sun's return was bringing forth a life more vibrant than she had ever seen. Miriam fell to her knees in the middle of her garden, tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of awe, gratitude, and joy. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The sun never left me." The hilltop grew quiet as Jesus paused, allowing the weight of Miriam's story to settle over his disciples. The clouds above seemed to mirror their thoughts, heavy, lingering, and complex. Peter, who was rarely at a loss for words, shifted uncomfortably. He drew his knees close to his chest and rested his chin on them, gazing out at the muted sea. Finally, breaking the silence, he spoke, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "Lord, Miriam's story reminds me of my own heart. I've seen you heal the sick and calm the storms. I've heard your voice, and yet, when trouble comes, I still doubt. When the clouds gather in my life, it feels like you've left me." His words trailed off and he looked down, ashamed. Jesus turned to Peter, his gaze tender but firm. "Peter, you are not alone in feeling this way. Even the strongest among you will face moments of doubt. But know this, the storms in your life are not punishments, they are preparations." The rain that fell on Miriam's garden seemed to bring destruction, but it also nourished the soil, making way for even greater beauty. In the same way, Your trials nourish your soul and prepare you for the work I have called you to do. Peter nodded slowly, his chest rising and falling as he processed the words. The other disciples remained silent, their faces contemplative. Each one of them could see echoes of Miriam's garden in their own lives, the times when darkness seemed unending, when hope felt distant. The youngest of the disciples, John, sat cross-legged with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He often observed more than he spoke, but now his soft voice broke the quiet. "Lord," he said, hesitating as though afraid his question might seem foolish, "does the sun shine even on those who feel unworthy of its light?" The question hung in the air, and all eyes turned to Jesus. He shifted slightly, sitting down among them so that his gaze was level with John's. "The sun shines on all," Jesus said, his voice filled with warmth. "It does not choose who is worthy of its light. My Father's love is the same, constant and unwavering. It is not given because of your deeds or withheld because of your failures. It simply is because you are His beloved child." John's eyes welled with tears as Jesus continued. "Do not let unworthiness keep you from the light, John. The clouds of doubt, fear, and guilt may try to obscure it, but the sun is always shining, just as God's love is always with you. All you must do is believe it even when you cannot see it." The disciples exchanged glances, each moved by the depth of Jesus' words. John nodded, his lips trembling with gratitude. For the first time he felt a quiet assurance that no cloud could overshadow. The disciples began to reflect aloud, sharing their own struggles and how Miriam's story resonated with them. James, who often kept his thoughts to himself, surprised the group by speaking up. "I felt like Miriam before," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "There were times when I felt abandoned by God, when I couldn't see any purpose in my suffering. I thought I was alone. But now, I wonder if the storms in my life were also preparing me, just as they prepared her garden." Thomas, sitting a little apart from the others, folded his arms and stared into the distance. "It's easier to believe in the sun when you can feel its warmth," he said thoughtfully. "But when the clouds linger, when the rain won't stop, it's hard not to feel abandoned." Jesus turned to him with a patient smile. "Thomas, faith is not about seeing the sun. It is about trusting in its presence even when it is hidden. The clouds are temporary, but the sun is eternal. The same is true of God's love and care for you. In time you will see." Their conversations deepened, and for the first time, the disciples began to see one another in a new light. Their struggles, though unique, were shared. They weren't just followers of Jesus. They were brothers in faith, united by the hope and truth He revealed. As the disciples reflected, the sky above began to change. The thick gray clouds that had hung over them all morning seemed to thin, and a faint glow appeared at the horizon. One by one the disciples looked up, their faces lighting with quiet awe as the sun began to break through. Golden rays pierced the clouds, spilling over the hills and the sea, transforming the somber landscape into one of warmth and light. The moment felt almost sacred, as though the heavens themselves were responding to Jesus' words. The disciples basked in the sunlight, their hearts lifting as the warmth touched their faces. It was more than just the return of the sun, it was a reminder of the truth they had just heard. The light had been there all along, working behind the scenes, waiting for its moment to shine. Jesus rose to his feet, the sunlight catching the edges of his robe and casting a soft glow around him. He looked at his disciples, his eyes filled with love and pride. "Do you see now?" he asked. The clouds were heavy, but the sun was never gone. So it is with God's love. Even in the darkest times, when hope feels lost, He is working for your good. Trust in Him and you will see. As the sun continued its ascent, the disciples remained on the hilltop, soaking in the moment. The warmth on their skin felt like a promise, a reassurance that what Jesus had said was true. They sat together, talking and laughing, their earlier heaviness replaced by a sense of renewed hope and purpose. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Jesus gathered them one last time. The sky, now clear, stretched endlessly above them, a canvas of stars beginning to emerge. Jesus' voice was steady, yet filled with the weight of the eternal truth he was about to share. "Remember this day," he said. "Remember Miriam's story and the lesson it holds. The clouds are temporary, but the light of God's love is eternal. When the storms of life come, and they surely will, do not be afraid. Trust that the sun is always shining even when you cannot see it. Carry this truth with you and share it with those who need it most." The disciples nodded, their hearts full. Each of them felt as though a seed had been planted within them, a seed of hope that would grow into something unshakable. They knew they would face trials in the days to come, but they also knew they would never face them alone. Years later, long after Jesus had ascended, the disciples would remember this lesson. They would face persecution, loss, and doubt, but they would hold fast to the truth of the sun behind the clouds. They would share it with the world, ensuring that its light, like God's love, would never fade. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.